Now, that brings us to the issue at hand, Hebrews 7. Hebrews 7. You see, this is biblical theology, guys. Hebrews 7. Who is this Melchizedek? That's what the author seeks to answer in verses 1 to 10. Who is this Melchizedek? The second question that he's concerned with is, why is this Jesus, our new high priest, not taken from the tribe of Levi? That's the question he answers in verses 11 to 19. You see, when God entered into covenantal relationship with Israel, when God married Israel on Mount Sinai and correspondingly established the priesthood, he chose Aaron, a member of the tribe of Levi, to be the first high priest. And from that point on, God made very clear all other priests were to be descendants of Levi. So the Hebrew Christians, Jewish Christians, they're confused. Why is Jesus Christ our great high priest if he's not a Levite? That's 11 to 19. Finally, in verses 20 to 28, the third question he answers is, why is Jesus Christ the ultimate and final high priest? Now, it would be hugely edifying to explore this, but it's not our purpose to engage with the third question. I really want to engage with the first and a little bit with the second, okay? So, who is this Melchizedek? Who is this guy? Generally speaking, and I'll get specific in a moment, Melchizedek was an actual historical person whose ministry in the Old Testament powerfully foreshadows the high priestly ministry that Jesus Christ would one day assume. Now, brothers and sisters this introduces us to a field of Bible study referred to as typology. Okay? Typology, not to be confused with allegory. What do we mean by typology? Typology is one of the ways that the Bible speaks prophetically. It is the study of types and their antitypes. What are a type and an antitype? A type, watch now, is an actual, historical, Old Testament person, event, or ceremony that has been designed by God to prefigure, to foreshadow in some way the person and work of Jesus Christ, the antitype. You remember, for example, the bronze serpent that God commanded Moses to set up on a standard, right? Numbers chapter 21. It was a type of Jesus Christ being lifted up on the cross. John chapter 3 makes that very clear. The serpent on the standard being the type, Jesus on the cross the antitype. The sacrificial lamb slain on the Day of Atonement was a type of the Lamb of God who would take away the sin of the world, the Lamb being the type, Jesus Christ being the antitype. The type is always imperfect and temporary and predictive. The antitype is always the fulfillment, the consummation, and the ultimate realization of the type. That which is not only better than the type, but supersedes and takes the place of the type. And this is the case when we come to Melchizedek. He was an actual historical person whose ministry in the Old Testament powerfully foreshadows the high priestly ministry that Jesus would one day assume. Now, let me get more specific. Notice first of all that Melchizedek was a king. Verse 1, for this Melchizedek, king of Salem. In fact, 4 times in these 2 verses he is referred to as a king. The king of the city-state of Salem. Maybe, in anticipation of Jerusalem. But not only was Melchizedek a king, notice that he is also referred to as a priest. King of Salem, priest of the Most High God. You know this name, El Elyon, which refers to the God who is supreme in his sovereignty over the whole of the created universe. So this Melchizedek is a royal priest. Take note of certain actions that speak of his priestly ministry. He met Abraham returning from the slaughter of the kings and blessed him. That's a priestly function. And to him, Abraham apportioned a tenth part of everything. That is a priestly function. That is, to receive a tithe from Abraham. These are functions related to his ministry as a priest. Notice then the names that are related to his kingliness. You see, keep going back and forth. King, priest, king, priest. Notice the names related to his kingliness. He is, first, by translation of his name, King of righteousness. Melech, king, Sadek, righteousness. That's his personal name. And then he is also King of Salem, that is, King of Peace. That's his official name. What's more, he is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life, but resembling the Son of God, he continues a priest forever. You say, now what in the world is this? Without father, without mother, without genealogy? It sounds like Melchizedek is some kind of supernatural being. Now, friends, it's very important for you to keep in mind that the writer here is not talking about Melchizedek the man. He is talking about Melchizedek the priest. And as a priest, he is without father or mother or genealogy, having neither beginning of days nor end of life. What's he getting at? The old rabbis believed that what was left silent in the Scriptures is just as important as what was said. In my mind, affirming inspiration, affirming inerrancy means that we guard the silences of the Bible as well, that we don't say what's not there. This does not mean that Melchizedek had no parents. It's a rabbinic way of saying there's no mention of his family heritage in the Scriptures. You say, well, what's the big deal with that? Under the Old Covenant, if you wanted to serve God as a priest, you needed to be able to sufficiently answer two important questions. Who's your daddy and who's your mommy? If your father's line couldn't be traced to Aaron himself, or you couldn't prove your mother to be of 100% Hebrew blood, you were automatically barred from the priesthood. So what point is the author making? That Melchizedek's qualifications as priest didn't come from his family line. Moreover, that he had neither beginning of days nor end of life. Now, this does not mean that Melchizedek as a man was eternal. Remember, the author is speaking about Melchizedek as a priest. That is, in the Scriptures, no mention is made of his beginning as a priest or his conclusion as a priest. You say, well, what's the big deal with that? Oh, I'll tell you, friends, it is a huge deal. Because a Levitical priest could serve from age 30 to age 50, and then they're done. So right now, if you're preparing for the priesthood, to be a Levitical priest, some of you getting close to 40, 50, I'm done. I'm done, right? A priest had a beginning of days, a priest had an end of life. He starts when he's 30, he finishes when he's 50, and it's over. But no such limitations were placed on Melchizedek. No beginning of days, no end of life. The author of Hebrews is saying that the priesthood of Melchizedek stands in defiance to the priesthood of the Levitical order by transcending both ancestral lineage and temporal limitations. Built into the Old Covenant is the idea, the notion of another priesthood. You say, well, Lord, how then did Melchizedek get to be a priest if not through the ordinary channels? And why was it that his priesthood had no limitations? Notice what the text says, resembling the Son of God. It literally reads, having been made like the Son of God. The word there, having been made like or having been made similar to the Son of God, is what grammarians call a divine passive. We've got divine passives all through the book of Hebrews. What is a divine passive? Anybody know? Come on. We got some THM people in here, right? I'm going to figure out who you are. What's a divine passive? It's where...
It's when you have a verb that's in the passive without having a subject who's doing it, but it's assumed to be God.
Yes, that's exactly right. God isn't mentioned by name, but the implication is He is the one who is performing this action. Okay? It's a divine passive. It means here God Himself directly appointed Melchizedek to prefigure a priestly order that would be far greater than the priestly order of Aaron and Levi, to foreshadow a greater priest who would come to occupy that priestly order, a priest whose qualifications are not determined by his ancestral lineage, nor whose tenure is limited by any temporal constraints. I wonder who the author has in mind. Of whom is this prefigurative? They were certainly all true of Melchizedek, these qualifications, to a greater or lesser degree, but they reach their consummation, their consummated expression in the one Melchizedek typified. Are we not told that Jesus Christ is the King of kings and the Lord of lords? And in the book of Hebrews, is not Jesus referred to as our great high priest? In Jesus, there is the perfect union of both priest and king. Moreover, two excellencies define Melchizedek: righteousness and peace. Interestingly enough, the Old Testament tells us over and over again that the Messiah and His kingdom, these two excellencies, will receive their greatest expression. You read a passage like this every Christmas, don't you? For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on His shoulder, King. His name shall be called Wonderful Counselor, Mighty God, Everlasting Father, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of His government and of peace there will be no end. He will reign on David's throne and over His kingdom, establishing and upholding it with justice and righteousness from that time on and forevermore. The New Testament refers to Jesus as the righteous one. He is referred to as our righteousness. So He is the greater Melchizedek, the King of righteousness. What's more, He Himself is our peace, Ephesians 2:14. On the night before His death, He said, "Peace I leave with you, my peace I give to you." Following His resurrection from the dead, He announces to His disciples, "Peace be with you." Jesus is the ultimate King of Salem, King of peace. Who is this Melchizedek? He is a foreshadow of the unique dignity of Jesus Christ, who is the King of kings, the source of righteousness, the author of peace, and qualified to serve as our great high priest by virtue of the appointment of God Himself. Now, watch this develop further. In the relationship that exists between Melchizedek and Abraham. Keep in mind, friends, that Abraham is regarded as the greatest of all Hebrews. Greater even than Moses. And yet in two very distinct ways, Abraham deliberately places himself subordinate to Melchizedek. Verse 4. See how great this man was, to whom Abraham the patriarch gave a tenth of the spoils. And those descendants of Levi who receive the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these also are descended from Abraham. But this man who does not have his descent from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. It is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior. In the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in the other case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. Now, it was very common in the ancient world for one person to pay tithes to another. That's not just confined to biblical history. But in that act, you see, much more was occurring than the mere transference of money or goods. To be the giver of the tithe was to acknowledge the role of subordination. To receive the tithe was to accept the honor of superiority. And that's the very thing that's occurring here. The author wants us to see Melchizedek in the superior position to Abraham. But he does this by saying much more than Abraham gave Melchizedek a gift. Notice how he stresses the stature of Abraham. He calls him, verse 4, Abraham, the patriarch, the founder of the Hebrew people, the progenitor of the nation. All would come from him, the friend of God. To recognize Abraham in his exalted status is to recognize the even greater status of Melchizedek, to whom Abraham submits himself. Second, notice the lavish nature of this gift. The patriarch gave a tenth of the spoils. It means the very best part of the plunder, the top of the heap. In the ancient world, it referred to that part of the spoils that was reserved for the gods. Third, notice the motivation that prompted the giving of this gift. And those descendants of Levi who receive the priestly office have a commandment in the law to take tithes from the people, that is, from their brothers, though these also are descended from Abraham. In the Levitical system, priests were required by law to collect tithes from the people. People were bound by divine law to give. And so give they did, not because of the inherent worthiness of the priest. It was a legal transaction taking place between brothers, people of equal standing. To the contrary now, verse 6, but this man who does not have his descent from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him who had the promises. In other words, this wasn't a gift on the basis of a prescribed law. This was given freely, joyfully, uncoerced. Why? Because of the inherent superiority and worth of the one to whom it was being given. Notice his superiority. Verse 8, in the one case, tithes are received by mortal men, but in this case, by one of whom it is testified that he lives. It reminds us of what he said back up in verse 3. The Scriptures record no beginning or end of Melchizedek's priesthood. The snapshot of Melchizedek given to us in Scripture leaves him in permanent possession of his office. And thus one could say that it is a perpetual priesthood. On the other hand, the Levitical priesthood is made up of mortal men. The Melchizedekian priesthood is made up of a man of a different kind, altogether different kind, right? So Abraham gives freely because of the inherent worth of this priest. Finally, make sure you catch the significance of this gift by seeing its representative nature. One might even say that Levi himself, who receives tithes, paid tithes through Abraham, for he was still in the loins of his ancestor when Melchizedek met him. You see, now, Art, wait a minute. If I have my history straight, Levi was Abraham's great-grandson. Right. That means that when Abraham met Melchizedek, Levi had not yet been born. Right. In fact, Abraham's own son Isaac had not yet been born. Right. So what is this? Because the people of God possess such a strong view of corporate solidarity, it was their conviction that an ancestor contains all of his ancestors within himself. Hence, in the Garden of Eden, Adam acted on behalf of his descendants, didn't he? And thus his sin was imputed to all of his posterity. On the cross, the second Adam acted in behalf of his people, didn't he? And thus when he died, his people died, and by faith his righteousness is imputed to them. Abraham was not giving this gift as a solitary man. He was acting as the representative of his people. And the amazing thing in all of this is, he who was accustomed to receiving tithes, Levi, and all of the priests that descend from him, is now shown to be giving tithes in Abraham. The point? Abraham, Levi, Aaron, and all of those who make up the Old Covenant priestly system are to be seen as clearly inferior to this priest Melchizedek, and more importantly to the one he foreshadows, Jesus Christ. In fact, don't miss the posture that Abraham took before in verse 6. But this man who does not have his descent from them received tithes from Abraham and blessed him. What was it that God promised to Abraham? This is staggering, friends. All peoples on earth will be blessed through you. Abraham was to be the supreme blesser. All would be blessed. You've been blessed through Abraham. But when he meets Melchizedek, he is so overwhelmed by his stature as priest of the Most High God that perhaps he kneels before Melchizedek, who in turn places his hands on Abraham's head and pronounces the blessing of God. Why would he do that? Verse 7, it is beyond dispute that the inferior is blessed by the superior.